Now, I will be talking about personas, which is one of many tools in the Futurist toolkit. If you go to the next slide. So I'll go through how they're usually used, how I've used it, and how I might use it in the future, and some ways that you might be able to think about using it in your context. Next slide. So it is all personas are already used, or the approach is already used in the humanitarian context through the use of sponsoring an individual child, for example, which is as similar as leveraging the same sort of ideas of connecting individual stories and generating greater empathy and triggering action. So often personas are used in UX for technical projects, rolling out software to understand how a user might interact with the software, and also in marketing. So in a retail setting, they'll be used to understand different customer segments. So then you can break it down and see what sort of things are going to motivate those customers to come and shop with you, what they might like to buy, and to solve their problems as a consumer. So that's an example on screen of what a persona might look like for a marketing project. We can go to the next slide. So I was in an organisation that was looking at developing a strategy, looking at the long term and trying to come up with an innovative approach to breaking free of what they call the used future. So that it's being stuck in the weights of the past, not being able to move forward and look at different ways of doing things. So when we were looking at how to develop strategy, it was, and I think continuing on a theme that's been constant throughout these sessions, is how do we engage people? How do we get them really contributing and therefore get buy-in for the implementation phase? Peter Drucker says the best way to predict your future is to create it. And so we went forward with that kind of approach to get people involved in coming up with the strategy themselves, coming up with their preferred future. So they're more likely to get behind it, implement it, and shift from that traditional way of thinking and doing. So the program that we designed was to run over 8 months, and knowing the culture of the organisation, I knew it was not going to be possible to tell people, here's what we're going to do over 8 months and get engagement to maintain through that time. And if we went with a full program of scenario planning over the 8 months, we also wouldn't have got support. So we did a taster. So we used personas from a futures thinking perspective to get that initial hook, to get people interested in thinking about the future, to get them thinking that it was possible to do things differently. And I think there was an element of needing to find hope that things could be different because things have been done the same way, and you get that answer of why do you do it? Oh, because it's always been done that way. It removes hope for anyone who was feeling that they could support change or that they had innovative ideas of their own. So the approach that we took was to go back to a risk management approach where we were looking at what were the drivers of change that would affect the risk landscape of the organisation and affect the strategy over a 10-year time period, which we chose being something that we felt people would still be able to engage with. It wouldn't be too scary, it wouldn't be too far that they dismissed it. So we came up with these drivers of change and then thought about which were the most important drivers, then used combinations of those for example, economic growth, cyber economy, and artificial intelligence, and then came up with a mini world. What would that look like in 10 years' time? What would the world look like? Then chose a customer or a client of that organization, and how would that customer exist in that world in 10 years' time? And then what kind of services then would they be expecting of the organisation? So that use of the individual story allowed people to participate in thinking about the future where they might not have otherwise been able to break free from the way that they saw the world right now, and therefore the 10-year future would have been just an extension of now. Normally we use personas within a larger scenario. So you build the scenario, you build the world, and then the person exists within it. In this case, we built the person, or built mini worlds, and then built people to live in them. And the person was the main thing to engage with, their story, rather than the broader world, which we found was, especially as an introduction to futures thinking, an easier way for people to participate. We then use those as a precursor to building or to identifying which drivers of change resonated with people as well, which we would build into the larger scenarios. And then, as I said, got people dislocated from their current future and jumpstarting that creative process. If you can go to the next slide. So if I was to do personas again, I think I would do it a little bit differently. And instead of having the combinations and then coming up with many personas, I think I would start with the worlds more purposefully, and then have multiple personas for each of those worlds. So you could look at the trade-offs for, if the world ended up this way, how would that affect different people, different segments in the future? So you might say, how will my donors be affected in this world? How will the people that I serve be affected? How will my peers be affected? And then see what the trade-offs are for choices that you need to make today. I think it was Bill Gibson said the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. So having multiple personas in one world then allows you to look at how that future would play out for different types of people. And I think that the persona allows people to be more creative and freer in exploring the different future worlds. I've just written a few questions here about how you might use them. There's many different ways you could apply personas to thinking about the future and to help your planning processes, whether it's understanding demand in the future or how the sector might change. I think personas can be applied in many different ways. But stories are a familiar and fun and non-threatening way for people to engage with the future. So I recommend giving them a try. It doesn't take a long time. It's not as intensive, or doesn't have to be as intensive as building scenarios. It can be a fun activity to do in a planning group even. So that's personas for futures thinking and how I applied it. It's not going to solve the problems of the 21st century, Matt, but maybe a tool to use to think about them.